In the elegant setting of a hospital room, Richard Thompson, a successful businessman now facing his final days, handed his wife, Sarah, a small golden key and a thin paper envelope. The atmosphere around them was serene, with white linen curtains gently swaying in the breeze, and soft sunlight filtering through the windows. Richard, with an expression of fatigue and sadness, looked at Sarah with eyes full of silent pain but also profound sincerity. Sarah, a middle-aged woman still bearing the impressive beauty that defied time, took the objects with trembling hands. Her eyes, filled with a mix of sadness and curiosity, reflected the emotional weight of the moment. The golden key seemed to glimmer slightly under the light, as if hiding ancient secrets, while the envelope was carefully sealed, adorned with elegant handwriting. Richard, with a weak and faltering voice, asked Sarah to open the dresser in his office only after his death. His voice quivered slightly, but his request was clear and direct. Sarah's expression, a blend of deep sorrow and restless curiosity, revealed the burden of responsibility now resting on her shoulders. She knew this request held great significance for Richard, and as she held the key and envelope, it felt as if she was carrying not just physical objects but also an emotional weight and a mystery that needed to be unraveled. Sarah arrived home, the weight of sadness and monotony enveloping her like a heavy blanket. Every corner of the house seemed to reflect a void, a constant reminder of Richard's absence. Sitting on the living room sofa, she stared out at the horizon through the windows, her mind filled with restless thoughts. It was then that Ethan, an old friend of Richard's and her secret lover, appeared. He entered through the door with a warm smile, but his eyes revealed a concern that did not go unnoticed. Sarah stood up and walked towards him, her arms opening for a comforting embrace. "Hi, Sarah," Ethan said softly, wrapping her in a tight hug. "How are you feeling?" Sarah sighed deeply, resting her head on Ethan's shoulder. "I'm still here, trying to get used to this new reality. The house feels so empty without him." Ethan looked at her with a mix of understanding and a touch of impatience. "I know it's hard, but you need to try and stay strong. Is there something you want to talk about? Something that might help?" Sarah lifted her head and looked into his eyes. "It's hard not to think about what he left behind. He gave me a key and an envelope. He asked me to open the dresser in his office only after his death. I can't stop thinking about what might be hidden in there." Ethan frowned, his gaze becoming more intense. "Don't you think you should find out what it is before? Maybe there's something in there that could change everything." Sarah hesitated, a mix of guilt and desire visible in her eyes. "I don't know, Ethan. He asked me not to touch the dresser until after his death. What if I'm breaking a promise? But what if there's something in there that could clarify everything? It might be something important that he left for you," Ethan insisted, his eyes piercing. "I understand it's difficult, but curiosity is natural. It's not wrong to want to understand what he left." Sarah bowed her head, struggling with her conflicting emotions. "I feel like I'm betraying Richard while getting closer to you. But the truth is, without knowing what's in the dresser, I feel like I'm living in limbo." Ethan touched her face gently, his warm skin against hers. "You're not alone in this. If you need help dealing with it, I'll be here. I just want you to know that you deserve to find the truth, no matter what it means for us." Sarah felt a mix of relief and anxiety hearing his words. She knew she was delving into complicated territory, torn between loyalty to her late husband and her passion for Ethan. The decision to explore what Richard had left behind seemed increasingly inevitable, but the weight of doubt and guilt accompanied her every step. Ethan, with an impatient look, sat on the couch beside Sarah. He watched her, his eyes carrying a mix of frustration and urgency. The tension between them was palpable as Ethan tried to persuade Sarah to take action. "Sarah, we need to talk about the dresser," Ethan said, his voice laden with a determination he could barely contain. "Richard is gone. There's no reason to wait. What he left behind could be important, and if we keep waiting, we might miss a valuable opportunity." Sarah looked at him, her expression full of doubt. "I know you're eager to find out what's in there, but he asked me to wait. I can't just ignore his request. What if it's a violation of his last wish?" Ethan leaned closer, his tone becoming more persuasive. "Think about it, Sarah. Richard isn't here to worry about what we do or don't do. What's in the dresser could change our lives. We might be missing something truly significant." Sarah shook her head, the internal conflict visible on her face. "But what if he left something important for me to open only after his death? I don't want to disrespect his memory, but at the same time." Ethan interrupted, his gaze steady. "What if what he left isn't just a memento? What if it's something that can help us, that can change our situation? Have you thought about that? We can't just let this pass." Sarah let out a deep sigh, her fingers intertwining nervously. "I don't know, Ethan. It's a tough decision. Part of me wants to know what's in the dresser, but another part still feels like I should honor his request." Ethan placed a gentle hand on hers, trying to convey support and understanding. I know it's hard, but you have to think about what's best for you. If there's something in there that can help you or change your life, you deserve to have that chance. Don't let doubt paralyze you. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, grappling with the pressure Ethan was putting on her and the sense of betrayal that accompanied it. The idea of opening the dresser before the promised time was tempting, but it also carried a weight of guilt. Ethan was pushing her to make a decision, and the promise she made to Richard was beginning to feel like an invisible chain around her. Sarah and Ethan, caught in their secret plan, prepared to open the dresser. The night was rainy, with the raindrops tapping against the windows and the sound mixing with their anxious sighs. The atmosphere, heavy with tension, seemed to reflect the gravity of their imminent actions. They walked down the hallway to Richard's office, each step softly echoing in the silence of the house. Sarah held the small golden key tightly, her fingers almost cold with nervousness. Ethan walked beside her, his eyes fixed on the key as if expecting it to reveal some hidden value. Reaching the office door, Sarah hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. "Ethan, are you sure we should do this now?" Ethan, trying to project a confidence he didn't entirely feel, held her hand. "Yes, Sarah. There's no turning back now. It's better to do this and see what we find than to keep wondering." Sarah took a deep breath and approached the dresser. Her breath visibly quickened. She bent down, placed the key in the lock, and began to turn it slowly. The sound of the mechanism engaging and the click of the lock echoed in the quiet room, creating an almost palpable suspense. When the dresser finally opened, a slight creak filled the air. Sarah and Ethan peered inside, their eyes gleaming with excitement and curiosity. The dresser revealed a collection of meticulously organized documents. They were in folders and envelopes, each with a carefully written label. Besides the documents, there was a mysterious box in one corner, with an old appearance and a design that seemed made to hide something precious. Sarah reached out to grab the box, her hands trembling slightly. "Ethan, look at this. What do you think could be inside?" Ethan, with a keen look, approached the box and examined it. "I'm not sure, but it looks like it must be something important. Let's find out what's inside." Sarah and Ethan, hearts racing and minds filled with speculation, were about to uncover the contents of the box. The rain continued to patter against the windows, intensifying the mysterious atmosphere as they prepared for the next step. Inside the box, Sarah and Ethan found a collection of carefully organized items. At the bottom, among papers and old objects, there were several letters and a diary. Sarah pulled a letter from the top and began to examine it, her eyes moving quickly over the words written in elegant handwriting. "Look at this, Ethan," Sarah said, her voice trembling with emotion. "These letters are addressed to different people. Richard was hiding many secrets." Ethan approached, picking up one of the letters and beginning to read. "Here, he mentions a secret bank account and an investment that no one knew about. It seems he had many affairs he didn't share." Sarah looked at the letters, her face pale. "It's hard to believe he kept all this. I always thought Richard was transparent with me. Now, I'm starting to see a side of him I never knew." Ethan, noticing the concern on Sarah's face, tried to calm her. "I understand this is difficult, but it's important. These letters can give us a clearer view of what he was planning. There might be something here that explains many things." As they talked, Sarah noticed an object further down in the box, a diary covered with a dark leather cover. She carefully picked it up, examining it with a growing sense of anxiety. "This diary is locked. I can't open it. What do you think could be written here?" Ethan looked at the diary and frowned. If it's locked, there must be something really important inside. Maybe Richard wanted only certain people to have access to it. Sarah sat on the floor, the box beside her, and began to leaf through the letters again. "With each letter I read, I feel more guilty for meddling in this. Richard asked me to wait. And now I'm invading his privacy." Ethan knelt beside her, trying to offer some comfort. "Sarah, I know this is hard, but you were looking for answers. Now that we're here, we need to understand what was really happening. Maybe the diary holds the keys to all this." Sarah clutched the diary to her chest, her gaze lost between guilt and curiosity. "I don't know if I'm ready for what I might find here. What if what he wrote changes everything I thought I knew about him?" As the rain continued to fall outside, the atmosphere in the office was filled with tension and expectation. Sarah and Ethan were immersed in a quest that promised to reveal hidden secrets and possibly change the course of their lives. Sarah, with trembling hands and a racing heart, finally managed to open the diary. The dark leather cover creaked softly as she turned the small key she had found in the box. The diary was filled with pages yellowed with age, and the smell of old paper filled the air as Sarah began to leaf through it. As she delved into Richard's notes, the content of the pages began to unfold. Sarah read with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. Richard had accumulated a hidden fortune, a wealth he kept away from everyone's eyes, including Sarah's. The diary detailed how Richard had made secret investments and maintained bank accounts in various places. The amount was considerable, far beyond what she could have imagined. More shocking was the discovery that Richard had planned to leave all this fortune to a charity. The diary's records revealed his intention to use the money for causes he considered noble, away from the hands of Sarah or Ethan. He had chosen a specific charity organization, and the diary contained details on how the money was to be managed and allocated. Sarah turned the pages urgently, trying to process what she had just read. Each word seemed to carry more weight than the last, revealing a facet of Richard she had never known. Disillusionment and a sense of betrayal began to mix with surprise as she realized how meticulously Richard had planned the fate of his fortune. However, what disturbed her the most was a specific note in the last pages. Richard mentioned a deep personal secret, something that could devastate Sarah's life. The words were written in a dark and regretful tone. He spoke of a past decision, something he had done that could have severe consequences for those close to him. As Sarah read these words, she felt a chill down her spine. The diary revealed a dark aspect of Richard's life, something that seemed to have been carefully hidden from everyone. She knew that the mentioned secret could alter not only her perception of Richard but also her own life. The emotional and psychological impact of discovering the secret was beginning to weigh on her as the understanding of what was involved enveloped her in a complex web of disturbing feelings and thoughts. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, the diary open in front of her, and Ethan watched her closely. The atmosphere was thick with tension, with the sound of rain still falling outside as a constant backdrop. Sarah ran her hand through her hair, clearly tormented by the revelations she had just discovered. "Ethan," Sarah began, her voice trembling with emotion. "Richard planned to leave all the fortune to a charity. Not to us. There's nothing here for us." Ethan, who had initially been excited about the possibility of an unexpected fortune, now had a closed and frustrated expression. "What? What do you mean? So all that money, it's not coming to you or me?" Sarah nodded, her expression a mix of guilt and despair. "Yes, that's right. He did everything to make sure the money went to charity. He left me nothing." Ethan stood up, starting to pace back and forth in the kitchen. "This doesn't make sense. We thought there was an opportunity for us. Why would Richard hide everything and not leave us anything? I feel betrayed. I thought we had something to share." Sarah stood up too, her voice firmer. "Ethan, I didn't know about this until now. Richard made his choices, and it's not my fault. I'm just trying to deal with what he left. And to be honest, I feel guilty for invading his privacy." Ethan stopped pacing and faced her with a mix of anger and disillusionment. "Guilt? You're not the only one responsible for this. Richard made decisions, and we're dealing with the consequences. But I didn't expect to be left out like this, without even a part for us. I feel like we're being punished for something we didn't even do." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to control her growing frustration. "I understand that you're upset, but we need to deal with this the best we can. We can't change what Richard decided. We need to move on and figure out what to do with this." Ethan, crossing his arms, seemed to struggle to contain his anger. "It's easy for you to say that. You weren't as excited as I was. You didn't have the expectation of finding something that could change our lives. And now, instead, all we found is a huge disappointment." The atmosphere between them was heavy, and the dialogue between Sarah and Ethan became increasingly filled with distrust and frustration. The tension between them was growing, and the argument intensified as they both struggled to deal with the unexpected discoveries and the betrayal they felt. Their relationship, already complicated by the situation, was now on the brink of breaking apart. Ethan sat at the living room table, his eyes fixed on Sarah with a grim expression. He had just read the last pages of the diary, and was clearly disturbed by the revelation. The room's atmosphere was tense, and the soft light from the lamp seemed to highlight the weight of the situation. "Sarah," Ethan began, his voice laden with uneasy tension, "you've seen what Richard really planned. He left us nothing. Nothing but a bunch of secrets." Sarah stood, the diary still in her hands, feeling a mix of guilt and fear. "I know, Ethan. And it's eating me up inside. But I don't know what to do with this now. Richard made his choices and I don't want to complicate things further." Ethan stood up, walking over to her and placing his hands on the table forcefully. "No, that's not how it works. We have an advantage here, and you know it. If Richard left everything to charity, that means there's a loophole we can exploit. But we need to act now." Sarah looked at him, confused and scared. "What do you mean by that?" Ethan moved closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial tone. "Think about it. Richard wasn't just a rich businessman. He was hiding a lot of secrets. And I'm sure if we apply pressure, we can get something for ourselves. And if you don't cooperate, I have other ways to use this information." Sarah took a step back, feeling the fear growing. What are you suggesting, Ethan? You can't be thinking of using the affair against me. That's cruel and disloyal. Ethan's hardened gaze showed he wasn't willing to back down. I'm not saying I'll do that, but I have my cards to play. If you don't help me get a part of the fortune, I might as well tell the truth about what happened between us. And the more I think about it, the more it seems that using these secrets might be the only way to get what we want. Sarah felt a chill down her spine hearing Ethan's words. Are you trying to blackmail me, Ethan? I never thought you were capable of this. Richard was clear in his intentions. He wanted me to respect his choices. Ethan shook his head, his expression growing more severe. I'm not interested in following rules that don't serve my interests. If Richard wanted to hide the truth, then we have to use that to our advantage. And if you don't cooperate, I won't hesitate to make all of this public. Not just the affair, but everything Richard hid. The tension in the room was palpable. Ethan's threat hung in the air, and Sarah found herself in an agonizing dilemma, struggling to find a way to deal with the situation and Ethan's dark intentions. The revelation of the diary had set off a series of actions and reactions that were beginning to unfold in unexpected and troubling ways. The news of Richard's death cast a veil of sadness over the house. The funeral was a somber event marked by genuine mourning, where family and friends gathered to pay their final respects. The atmosphere was laden with emotion, but also with a palpable tension that seemed to float in the air, intertwining with feelings of loss. Sarah, deeply grieving, stood near the coffin, her face pale and streaked with tears. She tried to find comfort in the words of condolences from others, but her heart was heavy and broken. The pain of losing Richard was evident in her every gesture, from the way she clutched a handkerchief to her face to the vacant look she directed at the coffin. Meanwhile, Ethan was present, but his demeanor was increasingly distant. He had positioned himself a bit apart from the ceremony, standing at the edge of the room with a tense expression and his eyes fixed on the floor. His behavior did not go unnoticed. He seemed more concerned with what might come next, with what he believed was his right, than with the sorrow of losing Richard. The conversations among the guests were low and restrained, with murmurs of respect and consolation. But amidst the whispers of lament, there were also discreet discussions about what might be hidden among the pages of the diary and the secrets Richard had left behind. Some furtive glances were exchanged, and the atmosphere was thick with a tension that seemed to grow as the hours passed. Despite her devastated state, Sarah tried to remain composed to fulfill the formalities. She received the hugs and words of comfort with visible effort, trying to maintain her dignity even as her world seemed to be falling apart. She passed by each guest with a forced smile, while the anguish in her heart only grew. Ethan, on the other hand, could not hide his anxiety. He moved from side to side, his gaze frequently turning to the entrance of the room as if expecting something. There was a restlessness in his movements, a clear sign that his mind was more preoccupied with the possibility of gaining something from Richard's fortune than with the mourning that enveloped the event. The atmosphere was marked by a mix of genuine sadness and growing tension, as unrevealed secrets and unmet expectations hung over everyone present. Richard's loss had brought to the surface not only the pain of his absence but also a complex web of emotions and conflicting interests that would still need to be resolved. On the day of the will reading, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation and anxiety. Sarah and Ethan were seated in a stark room, filled with lawyers and Richard's family members, all gathered to hear what the businessman had decided in his final moments. The reading began with a solemn formality, as Richard's lawyer opened the will and started to read aloud. Each word seemed to echo in the room, as those present awaited with bated breath for what would be revealed. When the lawyer announced that Richard had not left anything directly to Sarah or Ethan, a murmur of surprise swept through the room. The shock and disbelief on Sarah's face were evident, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to process the news. Ethan, sitting beside her, was also visibly shaken. His face was pale, and his eyes showed a mix of anger and disbelief. Richard, began the lawyer, created a trust fund with the entirety of his fortune. The purpose of this fund is to ensure that his wealth is directed exclusively toward charitable causes and the establishment of a foundation in his name. The foundation will be responsible for supporting projects that Richard considered important and that reflect his values and principles. The room fell silent, with all eyes on the lawyer as he continued to read the details of the will. The lawyer explained that Richard had deliberately chosen to ensure that his legacy would be used for the benefit of others rather than directly benefiting those closest to him. Sarah listened intently, her heart heavy with the realization that her hopes for an inheritance had been entirely dashed. She struggled to maintain her composure, though it was clear she was deeply hurt. Ethan, in turn, seemed to be fighting to control his frustration and anger. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for something that could change the situation. The lawyer then pulled a letter from an envelope and handed it to Sarah. She opened it with trembling hands and began to read. Richard's handwriting was clear and careful, each word carrying deep significance. The letter read, "Dear Sarah, if you are reading this, then my journey has come to an end. I want you to know that my decision to leave my fortune to charity and the foundation was made with the certainty that these actions would reflect my true values. True wealth is not in money, but in the memories we create and the actions we take throughout our lives. I believe that the impact we can have on the world is far more significant than any material value. Sarah finished reading the letter, her eyes brimming with tears. She felt a mix of pain and understanding, struggling to come to terms with Richard's final message and the fact that he had chosen a path that defied her expectations. The final revelation left everyone present with a sense of disorientation, as Richard's words echoed in the room, reminding all that, for him, the true legacy lay in actions and the impact he could have on the world, not in the material possessions he left behind. As time passed and events unfolded after the reading of the will, Ethan began to sense that something was deeply wrong with the situation. The discomfort and frustration he felt intensified when a new revelation began to emerge. Ethan was starting to realize that he had been manipulated by an external force, someone who had played with his emotions and expectations. Everything started to make sense when Ethan was approached by a private investigator, who revealed a series of details he was unaware of. The investigator explained that the true situation behind Richard's fortune was very different from what Ethan had believed. "Ethan," said the investigator in a grave tone, "there's something you need to know. The fortune you were expecting wasn't real. Someone used it to manipulate you." Ethan, stunned, tried to understand what was being revealed. "What are you saying? How is this possible?" The investigator continued, showing documents and evidence that revealed a complex web of deception and manipulation. Richard had a long-time rival, an enemy who took advantage of your ambition and personal situation. This rival used the promise of an inheritance to control and deceive you. The fortune you thought was within your reach never existed in the way you imagined. The news hit Ethan like a bucket of cold water. He remembered how he had been approached by various sources promising information and access to hidden assets, and how these sources had fed his hopes with details and seductive promises. The reality was that everything he had pursued had been an illusion, created by someone with a vested interest in exploiting him. Ethan was silent, the shock and disillusionment clearly visible on his face. "So, everything we did, all our actions and decisions based on the hope of that fortune, were just a farce?" The investigator nodded. "Yes. The situation was manipulated from the beginning. Richard's rival used the promise of wealth to create disturbance and discredit Richard, while at the same time manipulating you for their own ends. What remains now is only the result of the intrigues and secrets that were fed by this manipulation." Ethan felt a heavy weight on his chest, the reality of having been deceived and used weighing on him. The revelation brought a flood of confusing emotions: anger, frustration, and a deep sense of betrayal. What seemed to be an opportunity for wealth and success had turned into a series of damages and disappointments, and Ethan found himself struggling to process the truth and face the consequences of the intrigues that had shaped his journey. After everything that happened, Sarah found herself in a moment of deep introspection and disillusionment. The pain of loss and the feeling of betrayal had left scars, but they also gave her a new perspective on life. With Ethan missing, leaving no trace or explanation, Sarah was left alone to deal with the reality of her new situation. She spent her days reviewing the documents and letters that Richard had left behind. Deciding that the best way to honor his memory and find a new purpose was to immerse herself in the causes he had supported, Sarah became deeply involved in the activities of the foundation Richard had created. She began working as a volunteer, dedicating her time and effort to charity projects aimed at helping the underprivileged and promoting education and health. Sarah frequently attended foundation events and meetings, talking with others who shared her passion for making a difference. There was something genuinely comforting about witnessing the positive impact of the foundation's work. She started to connect with those being helped and found a sense of purpose in contributing to a greater good. Her dedication to these causes brought Sarah a new kind of peace and fulfillment. She began to realize that despite the challenges and losses, there was real value in living a life of service to others and in seeking a purpose that was larger than personal and material interests. The lessons Richard left were not just about the value of money but about the impact we can have on the world by living with integrity and compassion. As Sarah devoted herself to the foundation's work, she also found solace in new friendships and a support network that helped her rebuild her life. She came to see love and loyalty in a different light, understanding that these qualities are not measured by material possessions but by actions and sincere commitment to others. Richard's story became a powerful lesson for Sarah about the true value of things and the importance of living with integrity. The lasting impact she now sought in her life was a reflection of the inner change that had occurred after the storm of deceit and disillusionment. And so, she moved forward with a new understanding and an open heart for what the future held. If this story touched you, inspired you, and warmed your heart, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you're someone who spreads love and good things, share the story with those you think deserve to hear it and be transformed by it. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next video.